What's up, you guys? Marty Schwartz here with Marty Music. We've got another episode of Guitar Tours, and so honored to be at Gruhn's Guitars today with Mr. George Gruhn himself. Now, Gruhn's Guitars is like the legendary guitar store here, and we're in Nashville, for those of you that don't know. Now, how long have you been in the guitar business?
It's hard to establish the exact date, but I can tell you I got started wheeling and dealing and collecting in 1963.
Okay.
But I didn't have a store until January 1970.
Okay.
But I really wasn't supporting myself on guitars till 69.
Okay.
So before that, what I found is that I started out not even really knowing very much what I wanted, but I soon figured out that I really, truly liked pre-World War II Martin acoustic guitars. I also found that I had this addiction for them. And while they were cheap compared to the prices of today, I was a college student with mom and dad sending me money each month for apartment rent and books and food. And it's hard with a budget like that and no job and a pretty full-time curriculum schedule to support a collection. But what I found is that for every one I would uncover, I'd come across 20 or more that were great deals on things I didn't really want. Except there it was in the pawn shop or music store, and it was $75, and I knew where I could sell it for $150 or even $200. And that's what could support the ones I did want to keep, which when I finally did find them, might be retail price. But that's what got me started. The collection, in effect, was self-sustaining, but it was still a compulsive mania, which effectively means that this business is a result of a hobby that got out of hand.
And I think some of the best businesses are probably like that.
Well, I think that a lot of things turn out that way.
Yeah.
If somebody has an antique shop, they probably started out collecting. This mandolin I'm holding is dated on the interior label March 31st, 1924.
Yeah, tell me about this mandolin.
Gibson is one of the better known companies even today. They're known as much for making Les Paul model electric guitars as anything, but back when this was made, Gibson was better known as a mandolin company.
And mandolin was more popular than guitar back then, right?
This was at a tipping point for Gibson when this instrument was made. The mandolin orchestra boom was dying, and Gibson was worried about what are they going to do. So they decided, let's make a better mandolin, the ultimate mandolin ever. And it was this model, the F-5, which today is considered to be the best mandolin ever made. And bluegrass players and jazz players seek these, but they were designed to kickstart mandolin orchestra music. It was a resounding flop commercially, and it's extremely rare because it was a commercial flop. They made about 275 of them.
Wow.
But this one is priced at $165,000, and it is a great mandolin. And when you play it, it feels alive.
Yeah.
And to me, one of the things that separates the really, truly great instruments from the average is that the average may feel like a good, compliant tool. It's a good servant. The really great ones feel alive, and they may make suggestions that you would not have thought of otherwise. If you listen to early recordings of Bill Monroe and the Monroe brothers, when he had his other mandolin, he couldn't do the chops that an F5 would do. Once he got his F5, he could do chopped chords that would drive a five-piece band for rhythm as well as for lead. A whole new form of music evolved because Bill got one of these. And instead of playing classical on it, he played bluegrass. He invented bluegrass. Many of the electric guitars also were not designed for the music that we play on them today.
And so Bill Monroe's F5 is at the
It's at the
Hall
Country
of Fame?
Music Hall of Fame. His is dated July 7th, 1923.
So you're probably familiar with Maple Burns?
Yes.
So he has the serial number right after Bill Monroe's, I believe.
Maple has a great collection.
Yeah, so we did an episode of this with Maple. So I actually, it's so cool to have you holding this one, because I actually now have been educated by doing this series here, and I got to talk to Maple and get a little insight, and so now it's really, really wonderful to have you here with this one as well, so that is amazing. How did guitar overtake as the most popular instrument?
For Gibson and for steel string guitars, they in particular became very popular in the late 20s, but once the crooners came along, they wanted something mellower.
Right.
And the guitar really suited that well. But guitar had been around a long time. Martin emigrated from Germany to the USA in late 1833. And if you want to see a Martin from 1843, I've got one right here.
I very much would like to see that.
This guitar is not strung up right now. We just got it.
That's amazing.
I purchased this for the Belmont University Museum.
Yeah, the Belmont is a school here in Nashville.
One of my customers, Steve Shaw, whose father was Artie Shaw, band leader.
Oh, yeah.
And he died, leaving a collection of about 500 instruments. This one has pretty deluxe features. If you look at this bridge, everything on this that's white is ivory.
Got it.
It's not imitation ivory, it's real elephant ivory for the bridge. And the bindings on the edges of the body are ivory. The tuning gears are ivory. They're not gears, actually. They are tuning pegs.
How rare is this guitar right here?
This is an extraordinarily rare instrument. As far as how many exist like this, it certainly counted on your fingers.
I was going to say, borderline priceless.
This is, frankly, not going to bring as much money as the F-5 mandolin. The people who want this are museum collectors.
This is a new Martin, right?
It's not actually an exact copy of any original model because they never made one in that size. This guitar is built with mahogany that was cut in Belize in Central America, in an area where they were cutting actively between 1880 and about 1920. So the wood in the neck, the back sides, the neck block inside, and the end block are sinker mahogany. And what that is that they would cut trees and float them down rivers toward the sawmills. Some of the heavier logs would get waterlogged and sink. And underwater, it is remarkably well preserved. So this wood that has been underwater for over a century is still in fine condition. All they have to do is bring it up and dry it.
How much does this retail for?
Those are about $4,300 in sunburst finish like you're holding, even for 4 times as much. I really don't have anything used that's better than that in sound. Those are amazing guitars. Those are some of the best new guitars made in my lifetime.
It's an amazing guitar. This is another historical piece right here. Pretty much everything's historical in some way here, probably including some of those antiques and things that I saw.
Well, we have lots of interesting instruments, but this particular one does have quite a history. It was made by Gibson in 1940. You won't find one like it in the catalog.
Okay.
It was a custom order instrument made specially for the first big star of the Opry, Dave Macon.
And this is his?
This was his banjo. It has a neck that is similar to Gibson's style RB1, but the body is completely different. It's an open back, which is something that was already antiquated in 1940. This wooden dowel stick is something Gibson had given up using by about 1919.
What was the purpose of that stick?
It holds the neck in place, but Dave did banjo twirling almost like a baton. And he'd grab it like this. He wanted one that he could twirl. I'm not going to attempt to do what he did.
You're already
he was almost like the drum majorette he'd twirl it and do
Oh, like throw it in the air, twirl it?
Well, he didn't throw them up in the air, but he did a lot of weird, just all sorts of things.
Okay.
But he would do it where he would be playing chord.
Yeah.
He'd do some of that, and he could flip it and twirl it. He had it down where he could hit chords and as it was flipping past.
Right. Now, is this from your personal collection?
This is one that I've had for at least 30 years. I have another banjo right here. This is another well-known banjo maker of the day, Fairbanks Vega. This one was made in the early 1920s. That's all hand-carved.
Wow.
This is still their earlier design. My lifetime earnings playing music from 1963 is exactly $48 on 8 occasions that collectively add up to that. What makes a guitar or a banjo or a mandolin or any other instrument great is first and foremost design. If it's not designed properly, it doesn't matter how good the materials are, it doesn't matter how good the workmanship is, it doesn't matter structural workmanship. It can be fabulous structurally so far as not falling apart, but if it's not designed properly, the parts don't function well. And then number 2 is great structural workmanship, because if you have a great design, you don't want it to fall apart. So great design, structural workmanship that's good enough so it doesn't fall apart. Then last is materials. And materials, if they're really, really great, can improve sound. But if they're mediocre materials, if you have a great design and you have structurally good workmanship, it will still outperform something that has fabulous workmanship and fabulous materials, but not a good design. Sure. If the design isn't good, it doesn't function. This guitar is a 1933 Gibson L-5 model, and this particular one was custom built for Roy Smeck. He was called the Wizard of the Strings, and he was one of the earliest people to endorse quite a lot of different model instruments. But this particular one has his name, Roy Smeck, right here on the tailpiece. It has his name, Roy Smeck, on the truss rod cover. It has the letter S engraved on both sides of each tuner button for just S for Smeck. And we got it from the folks, their grandfather had bought it direct from Roy Smeck.
Is this actually for sale here?
This one is for sale. It's priced at $27,500.
Okay.
New.
Wait, how much again?
$27,500, yeah.
Okay, 5, 6.
Well, it's not cheap. This is Gibson style U-HARP guitar made in the year 1919. And this actually was the most expensive Gibson model at that time.
Is this the kind of thing where the player would play the harp sometimes and then switch to guitar? I mean, they're not really doing it together, or are they pedaling notes?
They actually did it together.
Oh.
This is a chromatic scale, and right now it's not in tune, but we have 10 strings in a chromatic scale and a standard guitar neck. And what they would do is they would play a chord and they could just hit the appropriate note and go
pedal back to it.
Yeah, they could just, and these were used in mandolin orchestras. Also, they just had such a visual pizzazz. It made you look like a freaking genius if you could play the thing. And people would look at that and they think, wow, you must really be good. It's in remarkably good condition for 1919. At this point, it's next year, it'll be 100 years old.
How many of these have you had in here?
We've had a surprising number of them. I think we may have 3 of them in the building right now.
Okay.
But
and it's really just got to be...
They didn't make a lot of them. I think they may have made as many as 300.
But someone looking for this today is really more, it's a collector, right?
Yeah, this is going to be more of a good museum piece.
Yeah.
This is a 1960, early 60,
Ooh.
Gibson Sunburst Les Paul Standard. This is a guitar that was $265 new, but this particular model, the Sunburst Finish Les Paul Standard, which was only made from mid-58 through 1960, is today one of the most sought after of all electric guitar models by any maker ever. And a guitar like this can push $300,000 plus.
You hold on to it.
But this particular one was made in early 1960, and it features a carved maple top with the carved contour virtually identical to the contour on that Gibson L-5. The body shape is virtually identical, except this has a cutaway.
What makes the 59 Les Paul in particular is the kind of holy grail guitar that people talk about?
It's the year when they first got it exactly right.
So a little bit of experience, but...
Well, in 52, the Les Paul had single coil P90 pickups and a gold color finish and a tailpiece that he designed where the strings wrapped under it and you couldn't damp the strings with the palm of your hand. It was awkward to play, and the neck was a bit fat. And then it had a very shallow neck angle to accommodate that bridge design. And then in 53, they changed the bridge design, but they still had the neck angle fairly shallow. 54, they put more pitch on the neck and they could put a higher bridge on it. It felt better. Late 55, they came out with a tunematic bridge like this and the stop tailpiece. So it gave better intonation with more adjustable. And you could also adjust the tension up and down on this tailpiece. It was the first year they got everything together. And then the very next year, they started screwing around with it, and they made the neck
maybe they didn't
shallower.
realize that it was the best they were going to make.
And then the year after, they discontinued it entirely. Rock and roll was still not a big deal yet. When people did play rock, if they wanted to sound like Buddy Holly, they got a Stratocaster.
Right.
This was too smooth somehow. And R&B was not something that Caucasian white boys were playing much. And the black players who could be extremely talented generally had no money. And when they bought guitars, they didn't buy them new. They bought them in pawn shops or as secondhand or trading from one musician to another. Companies like Gibson and Fender and Martin and others of that sort, they weren't thinking about what the musical trends would be 40 years later. This guitar came out too early for Mike Bloomfield or Eric Clapton to buy them new. By late 1960s, Bloomfield was playing one of these. But when I got calls from people prior to 68 looking for a Les Paul model because Bloomfield had one, most of them seemed not to have any idea who Les Paul was. They didn't know why it was called a Les Paul model, and I'd have to explain to people that Les Paul was this guy who played jazz. I still vividly remember a guy calling me up wanting to know if I could find him a Les Paul.
Les Paul.
Yeah, that is LES, Les Paul.
Yeah, of course, Les Paul.
Yes, and that's what he wanted. And I had to explain to him also that this was this guy. Lester Pulfus, who went by Les Paul.
How much does this one go for here?
Well, this one's not for sale. This is actually one of the Belmont collection instruments.
Gotcha.
But if it were for sale, in this condition with the capo wear and whatever, it would bring no more than about $250,000.
You just grabbed it so casually.
Yeah, so it's still an expensive guitar.
I did have one question more about another one of your hobbies. I see you have a lot of reptiles and there's antiquities in there. You have a science background as well?
My academic background is all in zoology.
Okay.
My father was a pathologist, and he took me on nature walks as soon as I was old enough to walk and talk.
Has that, the study of animals, helped you understand sales and marketing?
No, but what it has done is it gives me a solid science background in which I use the same basic skills that a zoological taxonomist would to look at instruments and figure out what they are.
Yeah.
And the same basic skills as a forensic pathologist to study one and figure out what's happened to this particular one? What is the history of this instrument based on what I can see? Every scratch, every changed screw or solder joint, every repair, we want to know what's happened to it. It matters because there's plenty of fakes of these.
Right.
You know, when these were $1,000, there were not a good number of fakes that looked convincing.
When they're $200,000.
Well, by the time they hit even $25,000, there were people making very convincing looking fakes that you had to know what you were doing.
If I wanted a modern Les Paul or a Les Paul, if I wanted a modern Les Paul, is there one in particular within the last 10 years that you think is...
Well, Gibson's been making replicas of these, like a Les Paul Standard is still a pretty darn good guitar.
Yeah, yeah.
This guitar is a Gibson Super 400 model made in 1935. First year of issue for this model. It was their first production model, the first production model of any company that had an 18-inch wide body with F-holes, carved top, carved back. And this model was their most expensive model in 1935 and remained so for quite a while. It was $400 new with case. But again, putting that in perspective, you could buy a fine car for that price at that time. It was designed for orchestral jazz rhythm, for a big band setting, not what I was just doing.
Sure.
But then again, a lot of these things aren't used for what they were designed for.
Right.
It is carved spruce top, maple back sides and neck, ebony fingerboard. The tuners are open back Grovers with engraving on them. This was their ultimate guitar at that time.
This was their Cadillac with all the trimmings.
Yeah. This one is worth about $20,000 to $25,000. A lot of these instruments really are fun. They have soul and personality, and they all have stories. A lot of these instruments can last way longer than their original owner, or even the great-great-grandchildren of the original owner, so they have soul and personality. Yeah. They feel alive. In fact, earlier I was saying that the sign of a great instrument is one that feels alive. I don't feel that we have any more right to do things like carve our initials in them, and I don't feel really that we should abuse them or scratch them up any more so than we should be tattooing minor-age children. It upsets me greatly when I see instruments that have been mistreated. These instruments are very special to me. I
got to tell you, George, you make that very evident here by getting to hang out with you. It's completely obvious, and I'm so happy that we've been able to, get some of this insight from you. So I definitely want to thank you for that. Really appreciate your time as well, letting us in here.
You're welcome back anytime, because there's lots more stories here.
Well, I'm going to take you up on that, and hopefully I can become a customer. If this series does well enough, we'll find out.
Well, keep in mind that not all really good instruments are super expensive.
Yes.
You can get some very good instruments for often enough under $2,500.
And when I say a customer, I'm thinking something downstairs.
Well, some of the things even upstairs are not as expensive as you might think.
Yeah.
Price alone is not a 100% gauge of merit. If you're creative, you can create fine music on some rather affordable instruments, and we have some that are not particularly expensive that I personally think are very good musical instruments that inspire me.
Well, it's been an education. Also, I'm definitely going to leave a link for Gruhn's. Those of you that now are interested, you can check out the link down there.
Guitars.com, Guitars.com.
Yes.
That cost me about $30 when I registered it. And you know how come it costs so little?
How come?
I'm old enough to have been there first.
Hey, that's right, that's right. Well, thank you again so much. Can I shake your hand, sir? Thank you so much. This has been such a thrill and education too. So I really appreciate it. And I'll be back. We'll see you real soon.